The smell hit Lucas's heart well before he even opened the truck door. It was the smell of dry earth, of dust baked under a relentless July sun, of something old and tired that had been fighting too long against forces it couldn't name. He sat in the cab of his rented pickup for a long moment, hands resting on the steering wheel, staring through the cracked windshield at the farm that had raised him, and somewhere along the way, lost him. Hartwell Family Farm. The wooden sign at the entrance had faded to a pale ghost of itself. The white paint was peeling in long curling strips, and one of the posts leaned at an angle that suggested it had given up on standing straight years ago. Behind it, the field stretched out in every direction, flat, wide, and heartbreakingly brown. The soybeans that should have been knee-high and green by now were short and pale and struggling, their leaves curling inward like small fists bracing for a blow. Lucas pressed his thumb and index finger against the bridge of his nose and breathed. He was 28 years old. He had a Bachelor of Science in Agronomy from Iowa State University, a master's degree in precision agriculture from Purdue, in a promising position at Agrovance Consulting in Des Moines that he had just put on hold indefinitely to come back to a place he had spent the better part of 10 years trying to leave behind. His father, Donald Hartwell, had suffered a cardiac event 3 weeks ago. Moderate, the doctors called it, as if a man's heart stopping and restarting could be graded on a curve. Donald was alive, recovering at the Ames Medical Center, and absolutely furious about all of it: the hospitalization, the medications, the enforced rest, and most of all, the fact that his son had dropped everything to come home. "I don't need you here," he had said on the phone, his voice rough and smaller than Lucas remembered it. "The farm doesn't need you here." But the farm did. The farm desperately did. Lucas got out of the truck. The heat hit him like a physical thing, thick, dry, relentless Iowa summer heat that smelled of baked clay and distant thunder that never seemed to arrive. He pulled his sunglasses off and tucked them in his shirt pocket, squinting at the nearest field. He walked to the edge of the first row and crouched down, pressing 2 fingers into the soil. It was hard, compacted. He pushed harder and felt the resistance of earth that had been worked too aggressively, too repeatedly, without enough time to breathe between passes. He grabbed a small clod and crumbled it between his fingers. It didn't crumble cleanly. It broke in chunks, dry and dense, with almost no give to it. "Well," he said to no one, standing and brushing his hands on his jeans. "That's a problem." The farmhouse was a 2-story, white-clapboard structure that had been built by his grandfather, Arthur Hartwell, sometime in the mid-1950s. It had been repainted twice since then, and had a newer roof installed after the hailstorm of 2019, but it still felt like a house from another era, functional, unadorned, built for people who worked too hard to care much about aesthetics. Lucas's younger sister, Natalie Hartwell, met him at the door. She was 24, finishing a nursing degree in Ames, and had driven out twice a week since their father's hospitalization to keep the house in order and manage the most basic daily tasks on the property. She looked tired in the way that people look when they've been holding everything together through sheer will and have been pretending it isn't costing them anything. She hugged him tightly. He hugged her back. "How bad is it?" he asked against her shoulder. She pulled back and looked at him with the kind of direct, unflinching honesty that had always been her defining quality. "Bad," she said simply. "Come inside. I made coffee." They sat at the kitchen table, the same table Lucas had eaten breakfast at every day for 18 years. The same table where his father had spread out maps and seed catalogs and farm ledgers, and argued with the radio about commodity prices. Natalie had laid out a folder of documents, bank statements, loan agreements, equipment maintenance records, and a letter from First Agricultural Bank of Iowa dated June 14th that was polite in the way that letters are polite when they contain very bad news. Lucas read through it slowly. The farm carried a mortgage of $380,000, which was not unusual for a property of its size. What was unusual, or rather, what had become a slow-building catastrophe over the past 4 years, was the operating line of credit that had been extended twice, restructured once, and now stood at $214,000 with a quarterly review scheduled for September 3rd. If the current crop yield projections held, the farm would not generate sufficient revenue to service the debt. The bank had outlined in careful and professional language the steps that would follow if that situation was not resolved. He's been borrowing against the operating line to cover losses since 2022, Natalie said quietly. He never told me. I found the statements in his desk drawer when I was looking for the insurance documents. Lucas set the letter down. He stared at the ceiling for a moment, then back at his sister. Does he know you found them? He knows. She wrapped both hands around her coffee mug. He said it was under control. It is absolutely not under control. I know that. You know that. She paused. He knows that too. He just can't say it. Lucas thought about his father, a man who had farmed this land for 40 years, who had raised 2 children here after their mother, Sandra Hartwell, had died of cancer when Lucas was 11 and Natalie was 7. A man who had never asked for help from anyone in his life and had built his entire identity around not needing to. A man whose heart had stopped and restarted 3 weeks ago, and who was lying in a hospital bed in Ames telling his son that everything was fine. I'm going to need access to everything, Lucas said. Every record, every invoice, every contract. Soil test results if he has them. Equipment logs, everything. I already pulled what I could find. Natalie nodded toward the folder. There's more in the filing cabinet in the office. And Lucas, she hesitated. What? He's going to fight you on everything, you know that, right? Even from the hospital, especially from the hospital. Lucas allowed himself a thin, humorless smile. Yeah, he said. I know. He spent the rest of that first afternoon walking the fields. The Hartwell farm covered 340 acres, of which approximately 280 were currently in production, split roughly between soybeans and corn in a rotation that his father had maintained for decades. The remaining 60 acres included the farmstead itself, a woodlot along the eastern boundary, and a low-lying area near the creek that flooded too reliably to be worth planting. Lucas walked every accessible row, moving systematically, taking notes on his phone and photographs at regular intervals. What he found confirmed and deepened what the financial documents had suggested. The soybeans in the north fields were showing clear signs of iron deficiency chlorosis, the characteristic yellowing between the veins of younger leaves that indicated the plant couldn't access the iron in the soil, despite it likely being present. The corn in the south fields looked marginally better, but showed signs of nitrogen stress in the lower leaves, a pale green fading to yellow that traveled upward through the plant in a predictable and concerning pattern. More troubling than either of those specific symptoms was the general condition of the soil itself. Everywhere he tested it, pressing his fingers in, digging briefly with a pocket knife. Observing the structure and texture, it told the same story. Years of tillage had broken down the aggregate structure, the beneficial fungal networks that healthy soil depended on, the mycorrhizal connections that helped roots access nutrients and water were almost certainly compromised. The soil didn't feel alive, it felt exhausted. He was standing at the far eastern edge of the property, near the woodlot, looking back across the fields toward the farmhouse in the distance, when he heard a sound to his left. He turned, 40 yards away. On the other side of the fence line that marked the boundary between the Hartwell farm and the neighboring property, an old man was walking along a row of corn. And the corn on that side of the fence was... Lucas blinked, certain for a moment he was misreading what he saw. Genuinely beautiful. Dark green, thick-stalked, moving slightly in the late afternoon breeze with the kind of healthy confidence that a plant only has when everything it needs is available and abundant. The old man hadn't noticed Lucas yet. He was moving slowly, deliberately, stopping every few feet to crouch down and examine something on the ground or touch a leaf between his fingers. He wore faded denim overalls over a plaid shirt, a sweat-stained cap with no visible logo, and boots that looked like they had been resoled at least 3 times. He moved with the careful economy of someone who had learned not to waste motion. Lucas walked to the fence line. "Excuse me," he called. The old man turned. He had a deeply lined face, sun darkened to a rich brown, with sharp, pale blue eyes that took Lucas in with a directness that was neither hostile nor particularly welcoming. He was somewhere in his mid-70s, lean and straight-backed despite his age. "You must be Donald's boy," the man said. It wasn't a question. Lucas Hartwell. Lucas extended his hand across the fence. "I'm sorry, I don't think we've met." The man walked over and shook his hand with a grip that was firm and dry. "Roy Calloway," he said. "I've been your neighbor for 31 years. You left before I moved in." There was no accusation in it, just fact. "I've heard the name," Lucas said, which was true. His father had mentioned Roy Calloway in phone calls occasionally, sometimes with mild exasperation, never with warmth, in the way that neighbors who are too close and too different tend to regard each other. "How's Donald?" Roy asked. "Recovering. It'll be a while before he's back on his feet." Roy nodded slowly, looking past Lucas toward the Hartwell fields. Something moved in his expression, a slight tightening around the eyes that Lucas couldn't quite read. "You're going to run things while he's out?" Roy asked. "I'm going to try to figure out what needs to be done and do it," Lucas said carefully. Roy looked at him for a moment. Then he turned and looked back at his own corn, and something in the set of his shoulders suggested he had things to say and was deciding whether any of them were worth the trouble. "Your father's had a rough few years," Roy said finally. "I know. The soil's in rough shape." "I know that too." Roy glanced at him sideways. "You an agronomist?" "I am." Roy made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite agreement. He turned and started walking back toward his rows, unhurried. "Come by sometime if you want," he said over his shoulder, without turning around. "I'll show you something." Lucas watched him go. He stood at the fence line for another minute, looking at Roy Calloway's corn and then at his father's, and felt a complicated mixture of professional curiosity and something else, something uncomfortably close to inadequacy, settle over him like the evening heat. He called his father that night from the farmhouse kitchen, sitting in the same chair where he'd done his homework as a child. Donald Hartwell answered on the 3rd ring. His voice was still rough, still smaller than memory, but sharper than it had been in the hospital. "You made it out there," he said. "I made it. Walked the fields this afternoon." A pause. "And, Dad." Lucas chose his words carefully. "I need you to let me work. I'm not stopping you. I need access to the accounts. The operating line. I need to talk to someone at the bank before the September review." Another pause, longer this time. Lucas could hear the hum of hospital machinery in the background, the distant sound of a hallway. "The September review is fine," Donald said. "We'll have the harvest by then." "Dad, the yield projections on the north fields alone." "Lucas." His father's voice was quiet but carried a weight that Lucas had been obeying since childhood. "I've been running this farm for 40 years. I know what it needs." Lucas pressed his free hand flat on the table, feeling the worn wood grain under his palm. "I know you do," he said carefully. "I just want to help. Then be there. That's help enough. A beat. Don't go changing things." After he hung up, Lucas sat in the quiet kitchen for a long time. The house made its nighttime sounds, the settling of old wood, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant call of something in the fields. He thought about the soil under his father's fields, gray and compacted and exhausted. He thought about Roy Calloway's corn, standing dark and tall and thriving on the other side of an ordinary fence line. He pulled up his laptop and opened his soil analysis software, began entering the observations he'd made during his afternoon walk. The numbers that emerged were not good. He ran projected yield models against current soil conditions, current weather forecasts, current commodity prices. He stared at the screen for a long time. Then he closed the laptop, turned off the kitchen light, and went to bed in his old childhood room, where a faded Iowa State pennant still hung on the wall, and the ceiling still had the same water stain shaped, vaguely like a boot that he had stared at through 1,000 nights of his adolescence. Outside, the fields lay silent and dry under a sky full of stars, waiting for something to change. Chapter 2. The weight of knowing. The first week was a masterclass in everything going wrong at once. Lucas had driven into Ames on Tuesday to meet with Craig Whitmore, the loan officer at First Agricultural Bank who managed the Hartwell account. Whitmore was a man in his late 40s with the practiced sympathy of someone who spent his days delivering bad news in pleasant offices, a beige carpet, a framed landscape print, a small American flag in the corner. He shook Lucas's hand warmly and then spent 45 minutes walking him through documents that confirmed what Lucas had already suspected but was hoping might look better in person. "The September review isn't a formality," Whitmore said, folding his hands on the desk. "I want to be straightforward with you, Mr. Hartwell. The bank has been patient. Your father is well regarded in the community, and we have a long relationship with the family. But the restructuring we did in 2023 required certain benchmarks to be met, and we're tracking below those benchmarks heading into this harvest season." "What does the farm need to show in September?" Lucas asked. Whitmore wrote a number on a notepad and slid it across the desk. Lucas looked at it. "That's based on full yield projections." "It's based on the projections your father provided to us in March," Whitmore said carefully. At the time, he indicated confidence in this season's yield. Lucas said nothing. He was thinking about the north fields, about the compacted soil, about the pale and struggling soybean plants with their curled leaves and their iron deficiency and their desperate, quiet failing. "If the harvest falls short of that threshold," Whitmore continued, "the bank would need to initiate a formal review of the account. That could include," he paused, choosing his words, "it could include restructuring options that would significantly affect the property." "Foreclosure," Lucas said flatly. Whitmore didn't flinch. "It would be a last resort, but I want you to have a complete picture." Lucas drove back to the farm in silence, his hand steady on the wheel, but his mind running at a pace that felt almost painful. He had 2 months. 2 months and a harvest that was, by any reasonable analysis, already compromised. He had modern software, professional expertise, and a family legacy that was quietly bleeding out while his father recovered in a hospital bed 40 miles away. He called his college friend and former classmate, Derek Fontaine, who worked as a field agronomist for a major seed company and had access to the kind of aerial imaging analysis that could give Lucas a more precise picture of the damage. "Send me the coordinates," Derek said. "I can run an NDVI overlay from recent satellite passes. Give you a full field health map within a couple days. I need it fast. I'll prioritize it." "Lucas, what are you dealing with out there?" Lucas paused, watching the flat Iowa landscape scroll past the truck windows, the geometric fields, the grain elevators on the horizon, the occasional farmstead set back from the road like a quiet statement of endurance. Compaction, iron chlorosis in the soybeans, nitrogen stress in the corn, soil structure that's been declining for years. "And a bank review in September that I can't miss." Derek was quiet for a moment. "How much time did your old man lose before he went down?" "I don't know exactly. Years, probably. He was managing symptoms instead of causes. That's the worst kind of problem. You can't fix years of soil degradation in a single season, Lucas. You know that." "I know that," Lucas said. "But I have to show enough improvement to buy more time." "All right. I'll get you the imaging." And Lucas, look into foliar iron applications for the soybeans. It won't fix the underlying issue, but it'll help the plants access what they need while you work on the soil pH. Already ordered it. I'm putting it on Thursday if the weather holds. It didn't hold. A line of thunderstorms moved through on Wednesday night, dropping 2 inches of rain on fields that were too compacted to absorb it properly. Lucas stood at the kitchen window at 2 a.m., watching lightning illuminate the flat expanse of the fields in white-blue flashes. listening to the rain hammer the roof and doing the grim arithmetic of runoff versus absorption in his head. When he walked the fields Thursday morning, the low areas had standing water. The soil in the row middles had a characteristic slick crust, evidence that the aggregate structure had completely collapsed, under the rainfall impact sealing the surface like a poorly fired ceramic. The water hadn't soaked in. It had run off, carrying topsoil with it, and what remained had dried in the post-storm heat into something closer to a cracked mudflat than a growing medium. He was photographing the worst areas when he heard the creak of a gate and looked up. Roy Calloway was walking across the field from the direction of the fence line, moving unhurriedly through the mud in his worn boots, looking at the soil around him with an expression that was neither surprised nor particularly troubled. "Gate was open," Roy said by way of explanation. He stopped next to Lucas and looked down at the crusted surface between them. He crouched slowly, with the deliberate care of a man who has learned to manage aging knees, and pressed 2 fingers into the soil. He held them there for a moment, feeling something Lucas couldn't see. Then he stood. "How'd your fields handle the storm?" Lucas asked. "Fine," Roy said simply. He looked up at the gray post-storm sky, then back at the ground. "The soil's been telling you it was tired for a while." "I know that," Lucas said, more sharply than he intended. Roy looked at him with those pale blue eyes, utterly unruffled. "I'm not criticizing you. You just got here." Lucas exhaled slowly. "Sorry." He gestured at the damaged field around them. "I'm working on it. What's your plan?" Roy asked. Not challenging, genuinely asking. "Foliar iron application on the soybeans when conditions allow. Deep tillage, pass on the worst compaction areas to open up the profile. Sulfur application to address the pH in the areas showing the worst chlorosis. Precision nitrogen top dress on the corn based on the imaging analysis I'm waiting on." He was listing it like a presentation, and he knew it, but the list was what he had. Roy nodded slowly. He was quiet for a moment. "That's a lot of inputs," he said. "It is. You going to run out of money before they work?" The question landed with quiet precision, like a well-placed tool. Lucas stared at him. "What do you mean?" "I mean inputs cost money. Deep tillage pass costs money. Foliar applications cost money. And if the soil structure doesn't hold through the growing season, if you get another 2 inches of rain after you till and it crusts over again, you've spent money and you're back where you started." Roy paused. "How much runway do you have?" Lucas thought about the operating line balance. He thought about Craig Whitmore's folded hands on the beige carpeted desk. "Not as much as I'd like," he said carefully. Roy looked at him for another moment. Then he turned and began walking back the way he'd come, his hands in his pockets, studying the ground as he moved. "Come over to my place Saturday morning," he said without turning around. 7 o'clock. "Bring your testing kit and your notebook." Lucas watched him go. "Why?" he called. Roy didn't stop walking. "Because I want to show you something about this soil that you didn't learn at university," he said. "And because you're running out of time to figure it out on your own." Natalie came out Friday evening with a casserole and what she clearly intended as a morale-boosting visit, but what turned into a long, difficult conversation at the kitchen table that left both of them more tired than when they'd started. "He called me today," she said, meaning their father. "He asked me how the Northfields looked." "What did you tell him?" "I told him they looked like they needed work. He told me you were probably overcomplicating it." She looked at her brother carefully. "He said you always had a tendency to overcomplicate things." Lucas stared at his casserole. "That's not the word I'd use for running proper diagnostics on soil that's been in decline for 4 years. Lucas," Natalie's voice was gentle, "he's scared. He can't come out and say that, so he criticizes instead. You know how he is. I know how he is." He pushed a forkful of food around his plate. "I also know that if I don't do this right, he loses the farm. Which means you lose the farm. Which means everything Grandpa Arthur built here is gone." Natalie was quiet for a moment. Through the kitchen window, the fields lay in the long Iowa evening light, gold-tinted and deceptively beautiful. "What's your actual assessment?" she asked quietly. "Not the version you're giving Dad on the phone. The real one." Lucas set his fork down. "The real one is that we're behind the 8 ball. The soil is in worse shape than I expected. The timing of the storm hurt us. The September review is going to require a yield that I'm not currently confident we can hit with the north fields in the shape they're in." He paused, "But I haven't given up. I have some things I'm going to try. And the neighbor, Roy Calloway, he's offered to show me something Saturday morning. I don't know what it is exactly, but his fields look remarkable, and I'm not in a position to ignore that." Natalie raised an eyebrow. "The old man. Dad calls him the eccentric." "Dad calls anyone eccentric who does things differently than he does." She almost smiled. "That's fair." She looked at him. "Be careful with pride, Lucas. Don't let pride get in the way of learning something just because it doesn't come with a university letterhead." He looked at his sister, 24 years old, tired, holding everything together in the way women in his family had always held everything together, while the men around them were busy being certain about things. "When did you get so wise?" he asked. She picked up her fork. "I've been watching you and Dad compete at being right for my entire life," she said. "You learn things." He went to sleep that night with Derek Fontaine's preliminary imaging analysis open on his laptop. The NDVI map of the Hartwell farm, a false color rendering of plant health across the entire property, was a study in orange and red in the areas that should have been deep green. He stared at it until the colors blurred. His phone buzzed, a text from his father. "How are the soybeans?" 3 words, no question mark. His father had never been a punctuation man. Lucas typed back, "Working on it. Getting all the data I can. Go to sleep, Dad." His father's reply came a minute later. "Don't let Roy Calloway fill your head with nonsense." Lucas set the phone down and looked at the ceiling, at the boot-shaped water stain, unchanged and permanent overhead, and thought about Roy's pale blue eyes looking at the damaged soil with an expression that was neither surprised nor troubled. That expression had stayed with him. It was the expression of someone who understood something deeply enough to not be afraid of it, even when it was broken. He wanted to understand things that way. He set an alarm for 6:15 a.m. and turned off the light. Roy Calloway's farm was, by any objective measure, nothing special to look at. The farmhouse was smaller than the Hartwell house, a single-story structure with a covered porch that held a pair of weathered wooden chairs and an old metal table. The barn was functional and well-maintained, but showed its age. The equipment Lucas could see, a tractor, a smaller utility vehicle, some implements stored under a lean-to, was older than anything his father owned. There were no precision GPS guidance systems visible, no drone landing pad, no satellite dish for real-time weather data. What was special was the land. Lucas had seen it from the fence line, but walking through Roy's fields on that quiet Saturday morning at 7 o'clock, the difference was something he felt as much as saw. The corn stood dense and confident. The soil between the rows, he crouched immediately, pressing his fingers in, yielded with a rich, almost spongy give that was completely unlike the resistant, compacted surface he had been fighting on his father's property. It crumbled between his fingers in the way that soil sciences textbooks, described in field agronomists, rarely actually encountered small rounded aggregates that held together but broke apart cleanly. Dark with organic matter, with a faint earthy smell that was almost fungal. The smell Lucas recognized with a complicated feeling of genuinely healthy soil biology. Roy was watching him from a few feet away. He had a thermos of coffee and had offered Lucas a cup, which Lucas had accepted and was holding in his left hand while his right was in the dirt. "When did you last till this field?" Lucas asked. 2019, Roy said. Lucas looked up at him. "You haven't tilled in 6 years? Not this field. I've got one field I still put a light disc through once every couple years. This one I've left alone. Cover crops every year. Cereal rye in the fall after corn. Crimson clover and radishes after soybeans. The radishes go deep, break up any subsoil compaction naturally over winter. Lucas stood, rubbing the dark soil between his fingertips, feeling its texture. "What's your organic matter at?" "Last test put me at 4.1% in this field. Started at 1.8 when I took over the place." Lucas made a sound that was involuntary, a short, quiet exhale of respect. "That's a 20-year process," he said. 23, Roy said. He sipped his coffee, unhurried. "I didn't get smart about it right away." They walked the field slowly, Roy narrating as they moved, not lecturing exactly, but explaining in the way that someone explains when they've thought about something so deeply, for so long that it has become inseparable from how they see the world. He talked about soil as a living system, about the fungal networks, mycorrhizae, that connected plant roots across distances and traded nutrients for carbon. He talked about the role of earthworms as natural tillers, about how a single healthy acre of soil might contain 1 million earthworms, and how tillage destroyed those populations in a single pass. He talked about aggregate stability, the way that fungal hyphae and bacterial biofilms literally glued soil particles together into structures that held against rain impact and allowed water to infiltrate rather than run off. Lucas listened. He had learned all of this in theory, in classes, in textbooks. He had taught it, briefly, to undergraduates in a guest lecture at Purdue, but hearing it in a field where the evidence was literally under his boots, from a man who had arrived at it not through formal education but through 3 decades of watching and adjusting and learning, was different. The knowledge felt different here, less abstract, more urgent. "You didn't go to school for this," Lucas said at one point. It wasn't an insult, he was genuinely curious. "Finished high school," Roy said. "That's it." He didn't say it apologetically. "I read a lot, I watched a lot. I made a lot of mistakes and paid attention to what they told me." "What made you start? The cover crops, the no-till?" Roy was quiet for a moment. They had reached the far end of the field, and he turned and looked back toward the farmhouse, squinting slightly in the morning sun. "My father farmed the same way your father does," he said finally, his father before him. "Till everything, plant everything, harvest everything, do it again." In 1997, I had a crop failure so complete that I wasn't sure I was going to make it. Drought, plus compaction, plus a soil that had nothing left to give. He paused. I was 46 years old. I had nothing but this land, and I had been farming it all wrong. He looked at Lucas. I got angry at first. Then I got curious. And curious turned out to be more useful than angry. Lucas thought about that. "What did your neighbors think?" Roy made the sound that was almost a laugh again. "They thought I was losing my mind. First couple years when I stopped tilling and my fields looked rough and weedy in spring, before the cover crops decomposed and the cash crop got established, I had people stopping on the road to look at what a disaster my place was." He shrugged. By year 5, a couple of them started asking questions. By year 10, a couple of them were doing it too. "Not my father," Lucas said. "No," Roy agreed, without judgment. "Not your father." Roy showed him 3 more things that morning, and each of them lodged itself in Lucas's mind, with the quiet force of a fundamental truth arriving late. The first was a jar of soil. Roy had it on a shelf in the barn. 2 jars, actually side by side, both filled with soil and water. He shook them both and set them down. The water in one jar clouded immediately and stayed murky. The water in the other briefly clouded, then the aggregates settled to the bottom, and the water above cleared almost completely. "Which one's from your field and which is from mine?" Roy asked. Lucas pointed to the clear one. Roy nodded. "Good soil structure holds together even in water. Poor structure just falls apart and clouds everything up." He looked at Lucas steadily. "That's what happens in your father's fields when it rains hard. The surface structure collapses. Everything runs off instead of soaking in. You lose water when you need it most." The second thing was a soil pit, a hole. Roy had dug deliberately in the corner of one of his fields and maintained as a reference point. Lucas climbed down into it and looked at the profile. The topsoil horizon was 14 inches deep, dark and rich, with visible root channels running through it and what appeared to be earthworm burrows going deeper. Below it, the transition to subsoil was gradual rather than abrupt. There were no horizontal compaction layers, no tillage pans, no hard boundaries where equipment pressure had compressed the soil into an impermeable barrier. "Feel the walls," Roy said from above. Lucas pressed his palms flat against the soil profile. He could feel the difference in texture as his hands moved down, the rich give of the topsoil, the slightly firmer but still permeable subsoil, the absence of the sudden hardness he would have found in his father's fields at 8 or 10 inches down. "How deep is the compaction layer on your father's north field?" Roy asked. 7 to 8 inches, Lucas said. "I can feel it when I push a rod in, right at the plow depth. That's where the tillage pan forms. Every year the disc goes through at the same depth. It creates a ceiling. Roots hit it and spread sideways instead of down. So when it gets dry, the roots can't access the deeper moisture reserves," Lucas finished. "That's why the soybeans are struggling in the drought periods, even when there's moisture in the subsoil." "That's right," Roy said simply. The third thing was a stack of notebooks. 30 years of handwritten observations, dates, weather, what he planted, what he observed, what questions he had, what he tried, what worked, and what didn't. Rows of careful handwriting in a series of ordinary composition notebooks, each labeled by year on the spine. Lucas held one of them and turned the pages slowly. The entries were methodical, specific, honest. Entries where Roy had tried something and it had failed were written, with the same neutral observation as entries where things had gone well. There was no narrative of triumph or failure in these pages, just data and observation and the slowly accumulating pattern of a man learning to read his land. "This is remarkable," Lucas said quietly. Roy shrugged, but something in his eyes was pleased. "It's just paying attention," he said. "Most people don't pay attention like this." Most people are busy or impatient." Roy took the notebook back gently. "Your generation has got a lot of tools that help you not have to pay attention, which is useful, as long as the tools are telling you the right thing. When they're not," he paused, "you need to be able to look at the actual ground." Lucas thought about his NDVI maps, his yield modeling software, his precision agriculture apps. He thought about all the data he'd been generating since he arrived and how clearly it had told him what was wrong, and how little it had told him about how to actually fix it in a way that would hold. "What would you do?" he asked. "If you had my father's fields and you had until September to show the bank something." Roy looked at him steadily. "I'd stop thinking about September," he said. "That's the wrong timeline to be working in. I don't have another timeline." "The bank review." "I know about the bank review." Roy's voice was calm. "What I'm saying is, if you manage this whole season trying to optimize for September, you'll spend money you don't have on inputs that don't address the real problem. You'll get a modest yield bump if you're lucky. And in 3 years you'll be right back here. Worse, maybe." He paused. "But if you spend this season starting to do things right, even if you can't fix everything in one growing season, you'll have something you can show. Not just yield, story." Lucas frowned. "Story? What you show the bank in September doesn't have to just be a yield number. It can be a plan with evidence behind it, a trajectory. Banks don't just foreclose on viable operations with a credible path forward." Roy said it simply, matter-of-factly, as if he had thought about this. "The question is whether you can put something real on the table." Lucas stared at him. "Have you been thinking about our situation?" Roy met his gaze without apology. "I've been watching that farm for 30 years, he said quietly. "I watched your father make the same choices over and over because change felt like failure to him. I've watched the soil get a little worse every year. I've been thinking about what would need to happen if someone with sense finally got out there and decided to actually fix it." A pause. "I'm glad you're here, Lucas. I want to be useful if you'll let me." The morning light was coming over the edge of the barn roof now, stretching long in gold across Roy's healthy rows of corn. A bird Lucas couldn't identify was calling from somewhere in the woodlot. The air smelled of that good fungal soil and coffee, and the faint distant sweetness of something growing well. Lucas Hartwell, 28 years old, with his 2 degrees and his software and his running out of time and his frightened pride, looked at this old man with his notebooks and his jars of water and his 23 years of paying careful attention, and made a decision. "Tell me everything," he said. The next 6 weeks were the hardest of Lucas's life. Not because the work was physically brutal, though it was. Not because the financial pressure was constant, though it was that too. But because changing course, genuinely changing course, not just applying new inputs to the same old approach, required a kind of sustained humility that Lucas's Hartwell had never been asked to practice at this scale or for this long. Roy's recommendations were not complicated. That was almost the hardest part, how uncomplicated they were, and how completely they contradicted what Lucas had been trained to do in crisis situations. Stop the deep tillage pass. The compaction was real and needed addressing, but breaking it open with heavy equipment at this time of year would destroy what fragile structure remained and spend money that couldn't be recovered. Instead, compost tea application on the worst areas, a liquid biology product that would seed the soil with the microbial populations it had lost, giving those organisms something to work with and letting them begin the slow work of rebuilding aggregate structure from the inside. On the foliar ion applications, not wrong, Roy said, but pair them with a chelated form that would work at the current soil pH. And don't oversaturate. The soil's biological activity was so suppressed that it couldn't process excessive inputs effectively. Give it what it needed, not everything that might help. On the bank presentation, build a soil health transition plan. Get baseline soil biology testing done now, before any interventions, so that the September presentation could show starting conditions, current conditions after 6 weeks of treatment, and a projected 3-year trajectory with specific, measurable benchmarks. Make the story compelling and honest. Give the bank something to say yes to. Lucas had heard all of this, understood all of this, and then had to go home and implement it, which meant overriding the instincts of his training and the voice of his father in his head and his own considerable professional ego. It was like driving a car for years and being told to take your hands off the wheel and trust the road to know where it was going. He made mistakes. 3 weeks in, he over-applied the compost tea in a section of the north field, misjudging the dilution ratio in a way that a first-year student wouldn't make. Roy found out because he was walking the boundary fence and noticed the section where the soil surface had an unusual sheen. He came over and looked at it and said, quietly and without ceremony, "You put too much on." That was all. No lecture. Just the fact. Lucas stood there and felt the heat of it in his face. Not the July sun, but the other kind of heat. The hot discomfort of being wrong about something technical in your own field of expertise. "I know," he said. "It'll be okay," Roy said. "Dilute it next application. The biology will recover." That mattered too, Lucas realized later. The way Roy responded to the mistake. Not ignoring it, but not amplifying it either. Just naming it and moving forward. He had spent enough time around experts, professors, senior consultants to know that most of them treated a novice's mistake as an opportunity to re-establish hierarchy. Roy just treated it as information. His father called every few days. The conversations were always the same shape, Donald asking careful, oblique questions about the fields, Lucas answering with the same careful obliqueness. Both of them maintaining the fiction that this was a collaboration when it was really Lucas making decisions that his father, if he knew the details, would probably oppose. The breach happened in week 4. Donald had been pushing for information about the tillage past the deep mechanical intervention that Lucas had planned originally and Roy had talked him out of. Lucas had been deflecting. On a Tuesday night, Donald called and asked directly, "Did you schedule the deep till on the north fields?" Lucas was sitting at the kitchen table, the notebook he had started keeping, his own version of Roy's composition books, a habit he had begun almost without noticing, was open in front of him. "No," he said. "I decided against it." Silence. "Then you decided against it." "The timing isn't right, Dad. Breaking up the compaction layer right now would do more harm than—" "Lucas." His father's voice was very quiet. "I've been tilling those fields for 40 years. I know. Your grandfather tilled those fields before me. I know. And you're telling me that in the first month you've been out there, you know better than 40 years of Dad." Lucas's voice came out steadier than he felt. "This isn't about knowing better. It's about what the soil needs right now, specifically, given its current condition. I have testing data. I have an analysis of the biology. The compaction is real, but mechanical intervention right now would—" "Is this Roy Calloway talking?" His father's voice had changed, gone quieter and harder. "Is that what this is?" Lucas was quiet for a moment. "Roy Calloway has been farming successfully for 30 years, using methods that work. His fields came through that July storm with no runoff, no surface damage. His soil holds water that ours is losing." "Roy Calloway is a crank," Donald said. "He's been telling anyone who'd listen for 20 years that the way we all farm is wrong. He's a neighbor, not an expert. He's someone who has 30 years of evidence on his side," Lucas said carefully. "I'm not asking you to agree with everything he does. I'm asking you to trust that I'm looking at the actual data and making decisions based on what it shows. You've been there a month. I know. And in that month I've run full soil analyses. I've got imaging data from Derek Fontaine. I've done biological testing that shows us exactly what the soil is and isn't doing. And I've built a transition plan that I'm going to present to Craig Whitmore in September." Lucas steadied his voice.
"Dad?"
"I need you to let me do this. Not because I know more than you, but because I'm here and I can see what's happening, and I'm asking you to trust me." The silence stretched. Lucas heard the hospital sounds in the background. He thought about his father in that bed, 40 miles away, unable to walk his own fields. "Don't mortgage anything else," his father said finally. "Not a dollar more on the line. Understood?" And Lucas, a long pause. "If this doesn't work, I know, Dad. If this doesn't work, I need to know you're honest with me about it, not managing my feelings." "Honest, I promise," Lucas said. After he hung up, he sat for a long moment with his hand on the phone. Then he opened his notebook and wrote, "Week 4. Northfield Section C biology test shows measurable increase in bacterial diversity. Aggregate stability improving in treated areas. Still early. Stay the course." Derek Fontaine drove out from Des Moines in week 5, wanting to see the fields in person after the months of remote analysis. He walked them with Lucas and Roy, the three of them moving through the rows in the mid-August heat, and Derek's professional assessment was the kind that a consulting agronomist gives when they're trying to be honest without being cruel. "You're not going to hit the original yield projections in the North fields," Derek said. "Not this season. You've improved the trajectory, but the biology recovery takes time, and you've got plants in the ground that were already stressed before any of this started." "I know," Lucas said. "The South cornfields are actually looking okay. The nitrogen top dress helped, and the structure there was better to begin with. You might come in close to projection on those." Derek paused. "What are you telling the bank?" "The truth," Lucas said, "with context." Derek looked at him for a moment. "That's a high-risk strategy. It's the only honest one." Roy, who had been listening quietly, spoke. "A bank that forecloses on a farm with a documented, evidence-based recovery plan, when the alternative is taking on a distressed rural property in a down market, is a bank making a bad decision," he said. "Most bankers aren't stupid." Derek raised his eyebrows. He had not spent much time with Roy and was still calibrating his impression of the old man. "You've done this before? With a bank?" 1998, Roy said simply. "I had 2 bad years while I was transitioning my methods. I sat across from a bank officer, and showed him 10 years of data I didn't have yet, and explained why what I was doing was going to work. He gave me a 2-year extension. He paused. The data I didn't have yet turned out to be accurate. Derek looked at Lucas. Lucas looked back. "I'll help you build the presentation," Derek said. Natalie came out every week, and the visits had changed character as the summer progressed. In the beginning, they had been triage visits, keeping the household running, preventing obvious disasters. Now they were something more like check-ins between people engaged in a shared project. She had learned Roy's name and asked about him specifically. She had started reading some of the articles Lucas left on the kitchen table, papers on soil health and cover crop systems that he had been working through at night. One evening she said, "You seem different." Lucas looked up from his notebook. Different how? She considered it. More patient. "You came out here like you were going to fix everything in the first 2 weeks. Now you seem like you're in it for the long game." "I am in it for the long game," he said. Whether the long game survives September is still to be determined. Natalie sat down across from him. She looked at the notebook, his careful entries, the dates and observations. "Roy's influence?" she asked. "Partly," Lucas said. "Partly just being here, doing the work, realizing how long things actually take." He paused. "Dad used to say that farming teaches you patience, whether you want to learn it or not. I thought that was a platitude. Turns out, it's just a fact." Natalie smiled. It reached her eyes in the way it hadn't for a long time. "Have you told him that?" she asked. "That he was right about something?" Lucas looked at the table. "Not yet. That would mean something to him," she said softly. "More than you know." He thought about his father. He thought about a man who had farmed the same land the same way for 40 years, who had built a life and raised 2 children, and refused to bend, even as the land slowly told him it needed something different. Not because he was foolish, because the habits of success are the hardest habits to question, and because this land was not just his livelihood, it was his identity, his father's identity, his grandfather's identity. Asking Donald Hartwell to change how he farmed was, in some essential way, asking him to become someone else. Lucas wasn't sure he had understood that when he arrived. He was starting to understand it now. The week before the September bank meeting, something happened that Lucas had not anticipated and that nearly undid everything. He came in from the fields on a Wednesday afternoon to find his father sitting in the kitchen. Donald Hartwell had discharged himself from the supervised care facility in Ames 2 days earlier than planned, against medical advice, as Natalie informed Lucas in a terse text, and had driven himself to the farm in his own truck. He was sitting at the kitchen table in the same chair where he had sat for 40 years, and he looked older than Lucas had expected, thinner, with a gray quality to his skin that the hospital lighting had obscured, and the afternoon sunlight at the farmhouse kitchen window made very clear. But his eyes were the same, sharp and measuring. "Dad," Lucas said. He set his notebook and test kit on the counter. "You should have called. I can come home to my own farm," Donald said. His voice was still rough, still small, but steadier than it had been on the phone. He looked at his son for a long moment. "You've been out in those fields every day." "Yes, show me." Lucas hesitated. "The doctor said." Lucas. His father's voice was quiet but absolute. "I've been lying in that bed for 2 months listening to my farm being run by someone else. I'm not asking you to carry me out there. I'm asking you to walk me through what you've done." They went slowly. Donald moved carefully, testing each step, and Lucas walked beside him without offering help he hadn't asked for, something that required more self-control than almost anything else in his summer. They went to the north field first, and Donald stopped at the edge and stood for a long time looking at the soybeans. They were not what they had been when Lucas arrived. They were taller, more even in color, the acute chlorosis symptoms reduced, though not entirely absent. They were not the picture of health, but they were better, measurably, visibly better. Donald Hartwell crouched down slowly, with the care of a man who has been told to be careful, and pressed 2 fingers into the soil. He held them there. Something moved across his face. You changed the tillage, he said. I stopped the deep pass. I've been building the biology instead. His father pressed his fingers deeper. It's softer, he said. His voice was neutral. The aggregate structure is recovering. Slowly, but it's recovering. Lucas crouched beside him. Dad, I want to show you the testing data. I've been documenting everything from the day I arrived, baseline to current. The biology numbers are moving in the right direction. Donald was quiet. He pulled his fingers from the soil and looked at the dark earth on them for a moment. Roy Calloway helped you, he said. Yes, Lucas said simply. He did. His father was quiet for a long time. He looked at the field, at the imperfect but improving rows of soybeans, at the sky above the flat Iowa horizon, at the fence line where Roy's green corn was visible in the distance. This corn looks good, Donald said finally. The words seemed to cost him something. It's remarkable, Lucas said honestly. Another long silence. Then Donald said without looking at his son, I should have listened to him sooner. Lucas said nothing. He let the words exist in the air between them without filling it. His father stood slowly and brushed the soil from his hands. Show me the data, he said. The morning of the bank meeting was overcast. The kind of flat gray September sky that sits low over the Iowa plains and makes everything feel contained and specific. Lucas had been awake since 5 o'clock, going through the presentation he and Derek Fontaine had built over the previous 2 weeks, a 60-slide document that was, in Lucas's estimation, the most honest piece of work he had ever produced. It was honest in the way that most agricultural presentations to lending institutions were not. It did not hide the bad news behind optimistic yield projections. It presented the baseline, the depleted soil biology, the compaction layers, the structure damage, in clear terms with laboratory data. It showed what 6 weeks of intervention had done: measurable improvement in bacterial and fungal diversity, demonstrable improvement in aggregate stability in treated areas, a reduction in iron chlorosis symptoms in the soybeans that could be directly correlated with the improved soil biological activity that made iron more plant available. And it told in careful evidence-based terms the story of what the next 3 years could look like. Not a promise, not a guarantee, a trajectory grounded in 30 years of Roy Calloway's documented experience on adjacent soil, extrapolated with the precision tools of modern agronomy that Lucas had at his disposal. Roy had reviewed the presentation the evening before. He had sat at Donald Hartwell's kitchen table at first in all the years they had been neighbors, and gone through it page by page while Donald sat across from him in a silence that was no longer hostile and not yet warm, but was, at minimum, respectful. When Roy finished, he had said, "This is good work." Then he had suggested 2 changes, a graph of his own yield data over 20 years, which he had retrieved from his notebooks in a way that took 20 minutes and produced 30 years of handwritten numbers that Derek had digitized and plotted overnight, and a modification to the 3-year projection that Roy felt understated the likely soil improvement rate in the first 12 months. "You're more confident than I am," Lucas had said. "I've seen it happen," Roy said simply. "I've watched it with my own eyes. You're right to be conservative, but don't be so conservative you lose the story," Donald had said for the first time in the evening, looking at the graph of Roy's yield data. "You've had a 34% yield increase since 2001 against the county average trend," Roy said. Donald said nothing. He looked at the graph for a long time. Craig Whitmore had a colleague with him at the September meeting, Sandra Oakes, the bank's regional agricultural director, a woman in her early 50s who had, according to Derek's background research, spent 15 years as a working agronomist before moving into agricultural lending. Lucas had been grateful for that information. It changed how he pitched the technical content. He presented for 40 minutes. Whitmore asked questions at intervals, careful professional questions that were covering the bank's exposure. Sandra Oakes asked better questions. She asked about the methodology of the soil biology testing. She asked about the specific cover crop species Lucas had planned for the fall. She asked about the timeline to full mycorrhizal recovery and whether it was supported by published research. Lucas answered everything. When he didn't have a perfect answer, he said so and provided the best available data. He had learned from Roy that honesty about uncertainty was more credible than false confidence. At the end of the presentation, he showed Roy's 20-year yield graph. "This is the adjacent property," he said. "Under the same soil conditions, same soil type, same climate zone, same historical management challenges, a transition to these methods produced these results. We have documented baseline conditions, documented intervention protocols, and a neighbor with 3 decades of evidence that this approach works on this land." Sandra Oaks looked at the graph for a long moment. Then she looked at Lucas. "Who is the neighbor?" she asked. "Roy Calloway. He farms the 280 acres directly east of the Hartwell property. He's been using no-till and cover crop systems since 1999. I know Roy Calloway," Sandra Oaks said. Something in her expression shifted, a quiet recognition, professional respect. "I visited his operation in 2018 for a case study we did on sustainable agriculture transitions in the Midwest." She looked at Whitmore. "His numbers are legitimate." Whitmore folded his hands on the desk in that familiar way. He looked at the presentation materials, at the soil data, at the trajectory charts. He looked at Lucas. "What are you asking for specifically?" "A 12-month extension on the September benchmark," Lucas said. "Not a restructuring, not additional credit, just time. The operating line stays where it is. The mortgage payments stay current. I've already mapped a path to maintaining those through this harvest, and a modest off-season consulting income I can generate while managing the transition." He paused. "In 12 months I will bring you a soil biology report showing continued improvement, a cover crop establishment record, and yield data from this season's harvest that will show you the trajectory is real." Whitmore looked at Sandra Oaks. She looked at Lucas for a moment, steadily assessing. Then she said, "The fall cover crop seeding. What's your species mix and seeding date?" "Cereal rye at 12 pounds per acre, hairy vetch at 8 pounds, tillage radish at 4 pounds. I'm targeting the last week of September ahead of first frost. The rye and vetch will winter over and provide spring biomass. The radishes will winter kill and leave channels in the soil profile." She nodded slowly. "That's a solid mix for this climate." She made a note on her pad. "I'll want a report in 90 days. Soil temperature data, cover crop establishment percentage, and an updated aggregate stability test on the treated sections of the North Field." "I can do that," Lucas said. "Then I'm going to recommend approval of the 12-month extension," she said. She looked at Whitmore. "Subject to the 90-day reporting requirement." Lucas sat in the parking lot of First Agricultural Bank of Iowa for 15 minutes after the meeting, not moving. He called Derek first, who said yes loud enough that Lucas had to hold the phone away from his ear. He called Natalie, who cried briefly and then recovered and said, "Don't tell Dad over the phone, tell him in person." He sat with the phone in his hand for another minute, then he drove to the farm. Donald was in the kitchen when Lucas came in. He was at the table with a cup of coffee, moving slowly and carefully in the way that had become his new way of moving. Deliberate, measured, stripped of the aggressive physical confidence that Lucas remembered from childhood. He looked up when Lucas came through the door. Lucas set his jacket on the chair and sat down across from his father. He looked at the man, at the tired eyes, the gray skin, the hands wrapped around the coffee mug that were his grandfather's hands and his father's hands, and in some ways, Lucas realized, his own hands. "They approved the extension," Lucas said. Donald looked at him. Something moved in his face that Lucas had not seen there before, a release of something, a letting go of a tension so long held it had become invisible. His father's eyes went bright for just a moment, the way eyes go when tears are a possibility but not a certainty. 12 months? Donald said. 12 months. With a 90-day reporting checkpoint. His father nodded. He looked down at his coffee. "That's good," he said quietly. "That's good work, son." Lucas said nothing for a moment. Outside the kitchen window, the September fields lay under the flat gray sky, and even in the muted light they looked different to him than they had the day he arrived. He could see the difference now, not just in the data, but with his own eyes, the slightly more even color of the soybeans. The rows where the soil was beginning to show the small but measurable changes that 6 weeks of different choices had started to produce. "Dad," he said, "I want to talk to you about the spring." His father looked up. "I'm not going to be able to keep running things from a distance indefinitely. At some point you're going to be back on your feet and back in those fields, and I need you to understand what we're building out there. Not just accept it, actually understand it. Because this only works if it's consistent year after year." Donald was quiet. "I think we should do this together," Lucas said. "Not me telling you what to do and you tolerating it. Together. Your 40 years of knowing this land, and my technical tools, and what Roy has taught us both. Together." His father looked at him for a long time. The kitchen was very quiet. The refrigerator hummed. A car passed on the road outside. "Roy," Donald said finally, not with contempt this time, just the name. "He knows things, Dad. I know he does." His father said it slowly, like a man putting something heavy down that he has been carrying a long time. "I've known it for years. He stopped. He looked at his coffee. It was easier to call him a crank than to think about what it meant if he was right. Lucas said nothing. He let his father have the moment. "I'll talk to him," Donald said finally. "I'll go over there when I'm a bit more on my feet, and I'll talk to him." "He'd like that," Lucas said. He was fairly certain that was true. 3 days later, Lucas walked the north field at dawn. The harvest was a week out. The combines were surfaced, the grain bins were checked. Derek had done a final yield estimation pass. The numbers were not the numbers his father had promised the bank in March. They were lower, and in places where the soil was worst, considerably lower. But the south cornfields had come in close to projection, which would carry the harvest revenue to a workable number. And the soil biology data from the treated north sections told a story of recovery that was slow, but unambiguous. He walked to the fence line at the eastern edge of the property and stood there in the early morning. On the other side of the fence, Roy's fields were quiet in the gray pre-dawn light, the corn standing tall and dark and finished, waiting for harvest. The soil on Roy's side was invisible from here, but Lucas knew what it felt like, that rich, yielding, alive feeling under his fingers, that crumble of dark aggregates, that smell of biology and depth and time. He heard the gate creak. Roy came through it, thermos in hand, wearing his faded overalls and his sweat-stained cap, moving with the same unhurried deliberateness that had first struck Lucas as the gait of a man who had nowhere to be, and turned out to be the gait of a man who was always exactly where he meant to be. Roy stopped beside him and looked out at the Hartwell fields. "Bank approved the extension," Lucas said. "I heard," Roy said. "In a small farming community, news moved through the air like weather. Good." They stood together for a moment in the quiet. "I'm going to put in the cover crop mix this week," Lucas said. "The cereal rye and vetch and radishes, 300 acres. Roy sipped his coffee. "I'll come over when you're seeding. Make sure your calibration is right on the drill. I'd appreciate that." A red-tailed hawk crossed the sky above them, moving southeast, riding something invisible. "Roy," Lucas said, "I've been thinking about what you said back in July, about the wrong timeline." "What about it? You were right. I came out here thinking about September, but September was never the actual problem. The actual problem is 20 years of decisions that depleted this soil, and the actual solution is 20 years of decisions that restore it." He looked at the fence line, at the boundary between what had been and what could be. September was just the test. The farm is the project. Roy looked at him sideways. Something in his pale blue eyes that might have been satisfaction, the quiet satisfaction of someone who has watched understanding arrive in another person and has the patience not to say, "I told you so, your grandfather built this farm," Roy said. "Your father kept it. That's not nothing." "No," Lucas agreed. "It's not nothing. What you build from here," Roy said, "that'll be yours." Lucas thought about that. He thought about Arthur Hartwell breaking ground in the 1950s, about Donald Hartwell raising 2 children here after his wife died, about the resilience built into the bones of that old white clapboard house and the stubbornness built into the Hartwell blood. He thought about Roy's notebooks, 30 years of handwriting that amounted to a love letter to the living system underfoot. He thought about his own notebook, 3 months old and already filling up, already becoming its own record of attention and learning and imperfect, earnest, necessary work. "I want to do it right," Lucas said simply. Roy put a hand briefly on his shoulder, just for a moment. The touch of a man who was not given to gestures, but understood when one was called for. Then he turned and walked back through the gate toward his own fields, his boots dark with dew, moving with that unhurried purpose through the gray Iowa morning. Lucas stood at the fence line a while longer. The light was coming up now over the flat eastern horizon, spreading gold and slow across the fields. In the distance, the grain elevator caught the first light and held it. The soybeans in the north field stirred in a breath of wind that moved across the whole flat landscape like something waking up. He pulled out his notebook and wrote, "September 12th, extension approved, cover crop mix ordered, 300 acres. First full season of transition begins this fall." He paused, then added one more line. "The soil remembers everything you do to it. So does the land. So does a family." He closed the notebook and put it in his pocket and walked back toward the farmhouse where his father was waiting, and where there was coffee on the stove and a harvest coming in. For the first time in a long time, the sense that this place had a future worth working toward.